You know, every language around the world has its own culture and language. It's the same with ASL. It has its own culture, deaf culture. The deaf community a long time ago had its own school for the deaf and programs and language. They used ASL. Many people used the language of ASL, and that's how they preserved the language. There were also hearing parents with hearing children that went to schools and looked negatively upon American Sign Language. And it was an oppression towards deaf people. So how did they continue to preserve ASL? There was a man, his name was James Howard. He studied ASL and gave 3 reasons of why they should continue to preserve ASL. The deaf community had a strong relation with one another. As long as the students went to the school for the deaf, they learned ASL. And they continued to communicate and study ASL. The hearing people did not understand that. Growing up together at the school for the deaf, and they would graduate together and socialize with one another. Plus, they would work with one another in large groups in the community. They would go meet other deaf. They would go to movies and sporting events. Several different things that tied the deaf community together. And that would preserve their language. They cherished that. Another reason is deaf people can't hear. They learn English, but it is hard to transfer into ASL. What happens is ASL is a visual language, and that's why they are more comfortable with it and cherish that language. Another reason to continue to preserve ASL is socialization. If a hearing person comes up to deaf people having a conversation, they would stop and change it into English. It prevents the hearing from studying ASL language and adapting to it easily. They don't know American Sign Language. So this way, hearing people cannot interrupt a deaf conversation. Let me explain a little bit between deaf children and hearing children in the learning of their languages. Hearing children, if born to hearing parents, their parents speak English. From the first time that they're born, they find out they're hearing, and it doesn't matter who is speaking, but they continue to learn the language. They understand it. It's important to speak English to your child. The parents, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, and friends, they will all come and speak English around the child. And the TV and the radio and many other things. The child will continue to hear the language and grow up knowing the language and the rules and how to form sentences and the intonations to tell if someone's angry or happy, different things. They become skilled and the English language is natural to them. If a deaf child is born to deaf parents, they will conversate using ASL. They learn the visual language growing up, and they become comfortable with the rules of ASL and the different facial expressions. It's the same as a hearing child to a hearing parent. They tend to become very skilled in American Sign Language because it's their first language. English is the second language that they learn. Why is there a third category? Well, hearing parents that have deaf children, That is the other category. Remember now, deaf children are born to, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. And the hearing parents don't know what to do. They're kind of ignorant about the whole thing. So they continue to speak English, but the deaf child doesn't hear anything. And they continue all day, every day, talking with their friends and turn on the radio, but the child is still deaf. They need a visual language. They use their eyes for their language. So growing up, their language development is pretty much none. So around 5 or 6, they go to school, and often the children don't have the knowledge in their language. So if they go to a school for the deaf, they start to use ASL and pick up the language. Why do they need to learn English? ASL is the natural visual language. They can't hear, they use their eyes, so they can pick up the ASL language fast. I'm going to discuss hearing education and the attitudes towards ASL. There's a tendency towards the deaf education programs. They think the number one thing that should be learned is English. It's important. It doesn't matter about math or science or social studies. What's important is English. Who cares about English?